Good morning. Welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 9th day of March 2026. And just a quick recap on what's in the dailies. The front page of the Daily Nation is a story. Flood warnings that were ignored. The death toll from deluge rises to 42. And they are talking about a report of the Auditor General back in 2024 following devastating floods that exposed systemic weaknesses, including ignored early warnings from the Kenya Meteorological Department. The report recommended measures to improve the state's emergency response, but as it gathers dust, disaster has struck again 2 years later with tragic consequences. Then on the front page of the Standard, they are talking about impunity, sovereignty for sale. How Sudanese warlord Al-Goni Hamdan Musa was granted a Kenyan passport on August 27, 2024, and much more there is in that paper, as well as the Daily Nation. In studio, I have two panelists. I have Bramwell Simiyu, who is the Chief Officer, Disaster Management at the Nairobi City County Government. Good morning, Bramwell.
Good morning, Sam, and good morning, viewers.
And it's good to see you. And also we have Mary Kilavi, who is an Assistant Director at the Kenya Meteorological Department. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, viewers.
Karibu sana. We're still expecting the arrival of Dr. Idris Ahmed, who is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross, as well as Professor Alfred Omenya, who is an architect and an urban developer. As soon as they are here, they'll be joining us. I will also be speaking to Robert Karuga shortly, who is a journalist at the Royal Media Services. He was out on Friday night. He witnessed quite a bit of the loss that we witnessed in our screens. He'll be talking to us about what he saw. But let me begin by talking to Mary, because it's been quite a heavy weekend, and we hear of deaths now at 43 or thereabout, and also the destruction that has come and the loss of property that you've seen. Where are we with the rain?
According to the prediction that we'd issued, we'd indicated that we'd have, of course, very heavy amount of rainfall from the 4th up to 8th, and then expect a bit of decline. And I think that's what happened yesterday. We saw the rain subsiding a bit. And okay, we'll be looking at more models in the course of the day so that we issue the national forecast. But so far, they're indicating that we are likely to see a reduction in amounts and a gradual reduction in terms of spatial coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if we were to look at the situation in the country Friday night, do we know the amount of rainfall that we received that may start to explain the destructions we've seen?
Oh yes, we had staggering amounts. Nairobi bore the heaviest brunt. For example, on the Friday, that's the 5th, the Moi Air Base recorded 67.3 millimeters. Then on the following day, 145 millimeters. Dagoretti on Friday recorded 51.3, followed with 112 millimeters on Saturday. Wilson Airport, 88 millimeters on Friday, and on Saturday, 160 millimeters. And Kabete, which had already recorded 144 millimeters on the 2nd, we received 121 millimeters on Friday, and on Saturday, 117.
117.
Yeah, and Gong, the surrounding area,
had
116 millimeters.
Yeah.
On the 5th, and then on Saturday,
and also to acknowledge the arrival of Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross, Dr. Ahmed Idris, and Professor Alfred Omenya. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you.
Mary, great. Mary, let's just understand, what does that mean? 117 millimeters of rainfall, Kabete, or the high of 145 at the Moi Air Base. What does that mean, so that we may begin to understand?
Okay, just to put it in context, what 1 millimeter means is if, say, for example, we had 1 by 1 square meter, a box of about 1 times 1 square meter, and you poured 1 liter.
Yeah.
So which means for you to get about for example, the 160 that was recorded in Wilson on by Saturday morning, it means you'd have had 160 liters. You pour that amount of rainfall on that 1 square meter box. So it would rise to very significant heights.
So 160 liters would be, I think a jar is about 20 liters. So you're talking about 8 mitungi 8 of water.
Yes.
You pour it in same space?
Yes.
Okay, all right. For you, Bramwell, what have you had to deal with those 2 days?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sam, for having me on the show. And indeed, as Mary has observed, Friday, we as a disaster management sector and a county faced what I'd call an unprecedented challenge from a disaster management point of view. Ordinarily, I'm sure Mary would also inform us that heavy rains are in the region of about 20 to 30 millimeters.
Yeah.
And that is what even our drainage system is designed to handle. So when you're talking about 160 millimeters, in that 1 meter, it's almost human height. And that then tells us that that is life-threatening. So as a department and as an emergency response service, and as well as our partners, including the Red Cross, we were faced with the challenge of dealing with floods that had impact on human life in terms of potential loss, in terms of displacement, in terms of danger of diseases. We were looking at damage to infrastructure, our road network. We were looking at the bridges, at houses were all flooded. We're also looking at definitely a potential loss of economic activity, loss of jobs, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So as a sector, we were then dealing with we're actually responding to a disaster.
Yeah.
As opposed to the many other activities that we had done in advance to just mitigate and prevent. And there are quite a number of things that perhaps the public had not seen. Our disaster management officers, acting on the warnings by the meteorological department, had issued alerts, particularly to those living along riparian lands, just to evacuate in anticipation of the rise in waters. We had also taken the precautionary steps of identifying temporary holding centers, such as our social halls, the Joseph Kanyedes and so on, and some of the schools that in the past have been used for this particular purpose.
Yeah.
And so that then was in preparation and in anticipation of the ensuing impact that we all witnessed, which I must say was unprecedented in the long term. But also as a department, we took the proactive steps of engaging with our strategic partners, including the Red Cross, the National Police Services, NDOC. As a matter of fact, on the night that we had this incident, we barely slept. We worked very closely with the KDF, the Red Cross, just to try and get to the hotspots, to the places where people were marooned. But I must say that one of the challenges we certainly faced was, the traffic jams and the gridlocks. And just to also bring to the attention of members that, water rescue is different from different forms of hazards.
Yeah.
Fire engines are just ordinary vehicles. And so accessing some of the flood-prone areas that Mary has talked about with the ferocity of the floods that we had, which actually overturned vehicles, was also something that we needed to do with the extreme caution.
Yeah.
But we were able to pair up with the KDF and the Red Cross to reach, I think that night we had about 16 sites that we
How did you do that?
Well, we waited for the waters to abate a little, and then, got there and, tried to evacuate to places where the trees had, fallen. We had our teams on ground ensuring that these were, removed, and just coordinating essentially with national government. Steps such as getting the expressway opened were actually geared towards just allowing the free flow of traffic. And I think the lesson learned here was really that I think one of the areas that we must pay particular attention to is on how our traffic management is handled in terms of whenever these incidents happen.
Okay.
Do we have streets that are clear to become one-way? Do we have a better traffic control, so that we allow people to move from one point to another, because just a delay of 5 minutes can have serious ramifications.
All right, to talk more about that and exactly how you executed that rescue, Dr. help us understand, because the Daily Nation is reporting 42 so far dead. Citizen TV reports 43. What information do you have now, estimated statistics?
The most recent data is 42 people dead and 50,000 plus displaced across the country. We unfortunately anticipate these numbers to rise because search and rescue, now search and recovery is continuing.
Yeah.
So our anticipation is in the coming days, certainly the numbers will rise as we look for more of the missing people across the city.
Right. And talk to us about how you've handled the response. What have you had to deal with?
So first, I think the response is many months of preparation for us as an institution, and I'm sure for many other institutions. Our specialized volunteers, we've been training them, we've been equipping them over the last 2 years to prepare for such eventualities. Yep. You'll recall the floods in 2024. Since the close of those operations, we went back to the drawing board. We put in place measures to strengthen our system preparedness based on the lessons learned from that particular experience. So as of Friday, when the rains were starting, we were ready. Our aqua rescue teams were fully prepared, they were fully equipped. It was extremely difficult because the rains were more than we had anticipated. Just maybe to add a point, one of the lessons I've learned over the last couple of years from Mary and her team, the general standard for the World Meteorological Organization is 20 millimeters of rainfall. Anything above that has a risk of causing floods, especially in regions that have poor drainage networks. So when we're receiving 160 millimeters in some points and slightly higher in different parts of the city, it really exceeded what we had anticipated, all of us, and that made movement extremely difficult. So the search and rescue teams, our teams, the most difficult part for them was to reach the different parts of the city in terms of the people who were affected. The roads were a mess. There were 9 of the major roads in Nairobi that were completely impassable for several hours, and that made our movement extremely difficult.
Right. Prof, maybe talk to us about your observation of the past 2-3 days in the city and the country.
Yes, actually, I was in the countryside when this was happening.
Yeah.
I'd just taken a break. So I was really watching this from a place of safety, if I can call it that. And, you know, oxymoronic as it may sound, I did actually get a big piece of land which I rehabilitated. So there's a forest there, there's proper ground cover and so on. So I was just watching these things. It was like I was living in another country. Yeah, and definitely we saw the devastation across the country. And yes, the levels, of course, of the rains and the floods were quite high. Yeah, but I was just thinking, you know, because even where I was, the floods in my neighborhood, but there was nothing in my place, and I think it did illustrate to me where the fundamental problem is, that it is human destruction that is at the core of this, of what we are seeing, not just within the city, but everywhere. Even where I was in Kisumu, you know, there are floods and people were actually very heavily affected, partly because of just other human activities. You know, people have plowed everything. I'm always fighting with people there not to cut trees, you know, for charcoal and so on. The natural system has been totally destroyed. Of course, within the cities, it was worse. And in fact, even as I was driving, it was terrible. You could hardly drive on those roads. They were all covered with, you know, with water, which basically tells you that number one, we've destroyed the natural system that you know, that was taking care of us, and what we've provided is woefully inadequate. Be it you know, the road drainage systems and so on. In the cities, of course, it's worse because we don't have the natural system at all. That has been wiped out altogether. And what you're providing, you know, to take care of this is not adequate. Yes, it's true that this time around, you know, the rain levels are very, very high. But it's also true that every year, without failure, I'm always in this studio discussing exactly the same thing. Yeah. So either we're very stupid or very, very stupid, actually. I don't think there's any other way of describing it. I know next year I'll be here. We'll all be here discussing the same thing. And the year after, and the year after, until, you know, we exit from this world. Yeah. So yes, I mean, we really have a catastrophic situation. And And if you're not able to be imaginative enough to decide how to deal with it so that we don't cause problems to this gentleman. In fact, everyone here, I try to deal with this. Mary, on one hand, is always crying that, look, I mean, we are having unprecedented rainfalls coming in. My brother here, Bramwell, and Idris, on the other hand, are saying, look, I mean, this thing is overwhelming us. But there's a gap in between.
Yeah.
Who is to actually prepare us, so that, we lessen. Disasters will always be there. We know that disasters will always be there. And of this nature, they'll always be there. But they can be lessened.
Okay.
Their impact can be greatly reduced, on the basis of what it is that we are going to do.
Okay, we'll get to more, but Robert Karuga is our video journalist here at Royal Media Services, and he spent the night filming, capturing images of what he could. Robert, good morning, and it's good to have you joining the conversation. Perhaps begin by talking to us about what you saw and where.
A very good morning to you, Sam, and your panelists. I think I could just start by saying that it was horrendous, because even the first distress call I received was from a lady whose car was marooned at Nairobi West. And even getting to Nairobi West took us over 4 hours, because it was a traffic gridlock within Nairobi. We first attempted to approach Nairobi West via Way. And then after it proved impossible, then we had to make a U-turn and then try accessing, I would see now, via CBD. So we went round to a point that now we even decided to, first of all, have a spot check within the Central Business District, and that's how we found ourselves at the sunken car park next to Reinsurance Plaza along the other canal. And when we got there, now the vehicles had already been most of them were almost completely marooned, and the owners were just there in despair. And they had nothing to do, because they had sought shelter because of the rain that had been pounding for over 6 hours, only to get out when the rain had subsided, with a view to probably accessing their cars to go home, only to find their cars marooned. And it was very sad to see people just there in desperation, with nothing to do. And the saddest bit was that there wasn't anyone or any kind of help, because when I talked to them, most of them just expressed their disappointment with the government of the day, because there was nothing, there was no one, they just had to stare and let the water subside. Mm-hmm. And then finally, after 4 hours, now we found our way to Nairobi West. And now Nairobi West the situation was surreal, because you can imagine a situation where people were stuck in traffic, and then within no time, the water levels rose rapidly, very fast. I remember talking to a gentleman who told me he was in his Prado, and by the time he decided to get out of the car, the water level was getting to his neck. And then the lady who had called us, by the time we were getting there, because we were in constant communication, she was telling us now she's not even able to see her car. Mm-hmm. Because the vehicles were marooned, and then they were now floating in water, literally. Then most of them were swept downstream. And by the time we got there, our water was even upside down. Now next to the road that leads from Moi Education Center towards Nairobi West and South B. And over 50 vehicles had been swept away. In fact, as we approached, we even saw some. We got there when somebody has just been rescued from the water there. They were almost being swept away, but members of the public rushed and saved him. Yeah. So it was terrible. It was horrendous.
Yeah, and Robert, did you witness any active rescue mission on the night?
Well, sadly, no, I did not. I did not. The only attempt I saw was on our way back from Nairobi West. We met the military along Langata Road at Moi Junction. And at that point, they were trying to inspect a vehicle where I think 2 gentlemen were waylaid by the rising flood waters, and then I think they succumbed because they were just seated in the car. Mm-hmm. So we were in the traffic. It was on the service lane that leads to Madaraka roundabout. So my driver told me to just get out of the car and find out what the problem was. I don't need to find out there was a car that was blocking the way. That's the first time I saw the military trying to. I think they just arrived from Langata Barracks trying to assess the situation.
Yeah. And what hours are these that you're talking about? When did you actually manage to make these movements?
By the time I got to Nairobi West at around, it was way past midnight. Because by the time I was at Timol Junction, it was around 3 a.m.
Wow.
Yes.
So is that the time that traffic started to ease up or what?
Yes. Now, we were stuck in traffic for over 4 hours trying to access Nairobi West via various routes. But after the 4 hours, now the traffic was, the snarl-ups started easing up, and that's how we got ourselves to South Beach.
Okay. And did you see anything from the expressway or something like that?
When we were close to the expressway, there was free flow of traffic along the expressway.
Yep.
But we also noticed that at some point they think they allowed vehicles to, especially those that were applying the Mombasa road, they were allowed to use the expressway.
Okay.
And that would have most likely it helped ease the traffic.
Okay. So what time did you finish your job?
Well, it was hectic because my driver had to now combine the newsroom assignment with picking people who are supposed to report to studios, mostly radio. So by the time we were at Timol, now we were headed to Umoja to start picking people because it was already morning. And most of them are supposed to report to work at around 5 a.m. So on our way to Umoja, all we could see were vehicles stalled, some at the middle of the road, some in trenches, because we saw when the water levels rose. I think motorists, the judgment was a bit poor. They could not actually tell where the tarmac ends, and most of the trenches that are at the edge of the road, most of the vehicles were plunged into the trenches. That was the common scene along most major roads in Nairobi.
Okay.
And we could see that by the time we were getting to Jogoo Road and then Umoja Eastland.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Robert, for speaking to us, and of course for your dedication in capturing some of those images that have stayed to tell the story. Robert is a video journalist at Raw Media Services. Mary, when you listen to what you've had here, and I take note that we are told that anything above 20 to 30 millimeters is heavy rainfall. When you give these warnings, what are Kenyans supposed to do with them? Because in other countries, you even hear there are timings that you're given. That are by a particular deadline, you have to be away from the danger zone. So how practical are the warnings from Kenya Met?
Well, one, we try to at least give the warnings early in advance for heavy rainfall events, about 3 days in advance, if possible. That's only then that forecasts are much more reliable, especially for heavy rainfall events. So the best that we do is to issue the warnings and disseminate them to the extent possible to all the relevant agencies, disaster management authorities, agencies and authorities, the line ministries. We use our social media and also we disseminate them to our county directors. So they use their social media, like WhatsApp groups, to disseminate.
Do you advise on action, or it's just to give the warning?
We give, like for example, the advisory that we issued on the 3rd. What we said is that residents in those areas are supposed to be on lookout for potential floods, flash floods and poor visibilities. Then flood waters may appear in places where it has not rained heavily, especially downstream. So people are advised to avoid driving through or walking in moving waters or open fields, and not to shelter under trees or near grilled windows to minimize exposure to lightning strikes. So
what I'm looking for is your advisory, or rather is your projection, your focus, is it as detailed to even tell the time of day that this heavy downpour is likely to come?
Not at that late time. Like for example, when we issued the warning, like 2 days before it happened. So it's not. But what we are working towards is what we call nowcasting. So we are trying to see if we can develop that. That would be able to enable us, using satellite imagery, to tell about when maybe
Okay.
in the course of the day.
Okay.
The
Okay.
rains are.
The reason why I'm asking that, and I think Dr. Ahmed will help us here after the break, is because if this advisory would be sufficient in terms of detail, perhaps people would close their businesses earlier, to go home earlier, so that we don't find ourselves in the situation that we did. We'll listen to more, including voices from Kenyans that were stuck in traffic or that were marooned or their houses submerged, lost property. We'll hear that after the break. Stay tuned.